Okay, with that last point in mind, let's move on to the second point of inquiry, the overlooked question of what are these effects, what are the effects of foreign fighters, especially Western foreign fighters, on the local conflicts, the oppositional political movements that emerged in the MENA region during the Arab Spring. And here there are a number of factors to consider. For example, foreign fighters might influence civil conflicts through the facilitation of resource mobilization. In other words, they bring financial resources, armaments, experience and training, which can influence the outcome of a war. They may even take on non-combat roles. They might take on roles such as providing public welfare, pursuing economic development projects as they attempt to gain local public support. And finally, of course, they can influence the political and ideological frames of the war by introducing new ideas, new frames, new ideologies. And it's that latter influence that I'm going to be focusing on, that Dr. Knight and I have focused on here in the presentation. Now, if we look to history, if we looked at past conflicts involving foreign fighters, we find that the goals and interests can markedly differ to that of locally derived oppositional movements. For example, if we look at Rich and Conduit's excellent research on Chechnya in the 90s and the 2000s and the role of foreign fighters therein, we find that when Chechnya experienced, starting in the late 1990s, a significant influx of foreign fighters from the GCCs, from the Gulf countries, and primarily from individuals who were experienced in other conflicts such as Afghanistan or in the Balkans and or Kashmir. We find that introduction of these individuals into the war coincided with the introduction of exogenous political and religious ideologies within Chechnya, such as various interpretations of militant Salafist thought, which academics have written who have written on the subject have attributed to the so-called radicalization of the Chechen independence movement. Now, of course, we can't attribute all of that trend, all that escalation in violence and brutality to the introduction of foreign fighters alone, since we know that the brutality and repression carried out by the Russian government, for instance, which involved, among other things, the use of heavy artillery airstrikes in populated areas, the use of kidnapping, torture, and rape of Chechen civilians, together with the significant length of the conflict. We're talking about two separate conflicts that lasted for roughly 15 years and continue in some ways today, that this obviously all contributed to the escalation or the level of violence we see in the war. So rather what we can say then is within this environment of destructiveness, of brutality, foreign fighters then found this cognitive opening to their ideas, which allowed them to reframe a movement which had been born as a self-determination movement, as a national independence movement, reframe it as another potential candidate for an Islamic State, another frontier in the militant Islamist movement. So much like we see in Syria today, the introduction of exogenous political doctrine can reorient and weaken the original political movements in the conflict. It can exacerbate political and ideological tensions within those movements, leading to infighting. But another critical point here is that the presence of foreign fighters, especially those who are identified as militant Islamists or so-called jihadists, can be used by states and international actors to reframe and delegitimize political opposition. So for example, if we go back to Chechnya and we look at the time period of the early 2000s, we find that the Russian government began portraying Chechen opposition as an exogenous movement, as quote-unquote Islamic extremists, as foreign jihadis. So the Russian government sought to reframe what had been this nationalist movement, this movement for self-determination, as just another quote-unquote bunch of terrorists in the global war on terror. And of course, they were aided and abetted in this endeavor by international governmental organizations, including the United Nations, which after 2001 passed Security Council Resolution 1373, for instance, and of course by the neoconservative administration in the White House under Bush. They pushed through these international laws, these international norms related to counterterrorism, which allowed the Putin regime to use the language of terrorism and counterterrorism, now legitimized within those international political circles, to persecute the movement. And of course, in Syria, we are witnessing the same thing, since the Assad regime, since day one, has been claiming it's at war with quote-unquote foreign terrorists, something which ironically has become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Slide, please. Okay, now I'll move on to the specific role of Western foreign fighters in these conflicts, especially the Syria-Iraq war. And first examine the question, why are there such high levels of Westerners arriving in Syria-Iraq since 2012? And the short, highly generalized, highly unsatisfying answer here is globalization, with its attendant technological revolutions, the faster and easier movement of people, ideas, and resources. But a more compelling reason or more in-depth explanation for this influx can be found in the role of new forms of media and new forms of technology, specifically in the evolution of electronic media and virtual online communities.
Now, and I'll walk you through a few slides here in terms of the trends that we find. And these findings come from the Global Terrorism Database, which is updated annually. The most recent is that of 2014. As we speak in terms of scale of killings, no organization rivals ISIS, which is not surprising. But Boko Haram ranks fourth in terms of the number of attacks. But in terms of casualty figures, Boko Haram is second only behind ISIS. So it's in fact been involved in killings far more than the Taliban and al-Shabaab as of 2014. Now, in terms of the number of terrorist attacks on an annual basis, and this has been tracked for many years by the Global Terrorism Database based at the University of Maryland in the US. We find a 1,000% increase in terrorist incidents in Nigeria within that period. And you look at the figures for 1995 and you juxtapose that with 2014. So it's been very staggering in the last few years. Despite, of course, several instances of civil strifes and so forth. The Mated Sine in the 1980s and several other incidents in cities like Kano and so forth. None rivals the ongoing terrorist activities in the Northeast. Now, this just shows that for all intents and purposes, Boko Haram is the main terrorist organization in Nigeria. So roughly 60% or thereabout of terrorist attacks in the country can now be attributed to Boko Haram. Now, in terms of annual variation in the number of counts, so 435 attacks in 2014, up from only 10 in 2009. And so the lethality seems to have increased in the last few years. And of course, the number of victims and so forth. Now, but this basically examines the way that in terms of the sheer volume, in terms of the sheer raw numbers, Boko Haram's attacks have increased in their level of seriousness. And so from 10 attacks in 2009, which on average killed 30 persons, there was a gradual reduction to 3 in 2011 and 3 in 2012, but this has gradually increased to 15 persons per attack in 2014. So obviously, its lethality is on the increase per attack. Now, and in terms of the geography of terror that this affects, northeastern Nigeria is its focus, and specifically Borno State, where 56% of the attacks of Boko Haram have actually occurred. And I'm just going to point out a couple of things here. And the first is that Boko Haram, in fact, rarely claims responsibility for its attacks. Roughly 13% of cases of attacks that are attributed to it, Boko Haram would claim those attacks as having been carried out by its operatives. In the larger percentage of cases, 87% of cases, Boko Haram does not, in fact, claim responsibility for it. And this, of course, has policy implications in terms of how the Nigerian state responds to Boko Haram. If certain attacks are going on and the group does not, in fact, claim credit, which is counterintuitive when you look at how other terrorist organizations around the world are generally quick to claim credit for their attacks. Boko Haram rarely does so. Now, its tactics and weapons generally favor attacks on private citizens and their property, armed assault rather than bombs, in spite of the understandable attention paid to its use of bombs, IEDs, and so forth. Most of Boko Haram's attacks are in fact carried out through firearms and so forth. Hostage taking is fairly tangential to its activities ranging from 1 to 10%, despite, of course, the global attention paid to its kidnapping activities. It's, in fact, only a small percentage of its broader activities in northeastern Nigeria. I'm just going to skip this and focus on gaps in the literature. Despite all that's been written about this, it's a growing body of work, but increasingly we realize that a lot of attention has been focused on Boko Haram in and of itself, rather than, say, the civil society, counter movements, and so forth. And this is where our study comes in. There's no definitive study, for instance, on the level of public support that Boko Haram enjoys. And the public support for Boko Haram seems to have gone through a process of evolution with widespread support initially, but when the attacks escalated, it began to lose public support very rapidly. But also the intricacies of the Nigerian military, its dynamics that have played a role in the way that Boko Haram has emerged as the uber terrorist group in the country. And of course, the counter movements, which I alluded to earlier, and of course, the gendered nature of the Boko Haram insurgency. And I'm going to give you a slice of some of our findings in that respect. So the current study focuses on Boko Haram, its etiology and so forth, and tries to identify some of the gaps that I just mentioned. Its mixed methods are used, so a couple of surveys are ongoing, one exclusively designed for activists, social movement activists, specifically those working with the hashtag Bring Back Our Girls movement in its original format, the Abuja hashtag Bring Back Our Girls movement, led by Obi Ezekwesili, whom Nancy Anneman and the wonderful folks at the International Center and Global Ed Program were able to bring here in January of this year. And of course, qualitative aspects of this would involve interviews and focus group discussions, and I have just returned from a 3-month fellowship which enabled me to be able to do a number of interviews.
So the Somali diaspora in Canada is estimated to have around 150,000 members, with Toronto being its largest home. The great majority of Somali Canadians immigrated to Canada in the early 90s following civil unrest and political instability in Somalia. And the community has received much negative media attention in recent years because a disproportionate number of young males in particular have died in homicides, and a small handful of Somali Canadians have left Canada to join al-Shabaab and more recently ISIS. Many Edmontonians will have also heard about al-Shabaab's call to attack West Edmonton Mall. And so as a consequence of this negative attention, most of our participants perceive themselves to be a highly stigmatized group beset with 3 strikes against them, as newcomers and refugees, as blacks, and as Muslims. So indeed, one of our participants pointed out that Somalis are widely viewed as the lowest of the low in terms of immigrant groups, even within the broader black community. We are the new Jamaicans. All of our interview participants describe experiences of discrimination in many areas of Canadian society, and the cumulative effect of their discrimination experiences for both male and female participants is a perception that they occupy an inferior position within Canadian society and that they belong to the least wanted immigrant group in Canada. Terrorism scholars have argued that this type of hyper-marginalization is in the host society may render some members of affected communities vulnerable to the risk of radicalization and violent extremism. So basically saying that community members who are marginalized have an increased risk to seek a place of belonging in radical groups or other illegitimate avenues, so gangs or drug dealing circles or something like that. Olivier Roy even goes a step further and suggests that this is particularly true for second-generation Muslims in Western nations who face racism, social exclusion, and loneliness on a daily basis. And he argues that they may find that terrorist groups can offer a valorizing substitute identity. So radical groups can be attractive in the sense that they can offer excitement, glory, and meaning. So having that in mind, we were particularly interested in what young Somali community members had to say about al-Shabaab. So is al-Shabaab interesting for young 1.5 and second generation Somali Canadians, and if so, why? And how do they feel about the group itself, but also about those from the community who joined? Because I'm not sure what you know about al-Shabaab. Shabaab is a remnant youth wing of the Islamic Courts Union, which ruled much of southern Somalia until 2006. It has seen its influence and power diminish over recent years, and internal struggles within the organizations suggest that this lack of success in the domestic theater may be encouraging the development of a more global jihadist ideology. And there are suggestions that there has been a recent turn in the direction of the far enemy, so striking at civilians of foreign nations that supply military support to al-Shabaab's domestic enemies. By 2012, nearly a quarter of its attacks were occurring in outside of Somalia, in neighboring Kenya, which is a major ally and military supporter of the transitional national government in Somalia. And the most notorious of these attacks was the Westgate Mall attack in 2013, through which al-Shabaab reached a globalized level of notoriety, becoming a central feature in the news cycles of international media. The US designated the group a terrorist organization in 2008, and Canada followed suit in 2010. In the Canadian context, it's estimated that around 15 to 25 young men in their 20s have left to join the organization, and it's believed that around 30 to 40 US Americans are fighting alongside al-Shabaab. These numbers are also from the ICSR. So going back to the thought that radical groups can offer excitement and glory and an identity, I'm going to present some of our data. So nearly a third of our participants who offered a response to our question about why people would make the decision to join al-Shabaab invoked this glory and pride theme, often remarking that al-Shabaab recruits style themselves as glorious religious warriors. So this participant said, it's immense pride. A lot of time in the religion, people are referred to as heroes, and there are so many hero stories. Just the name that is used, that's shared, Mujahideen, coming from the word jihad, like this person is looked up to. I'm just saying the credentials and the honor that's given to that title. It's like the equivalent to like a samurai, what a samurai was in Japan. You know, people would want to be that, so it's glorified. And another one mentioned, they want to feel like a martyr, and they want to feel like the stories during the Prophet's time when there was something worth fighting for. When you were being attacked, you know, and you were defending yourself, you know. But al-Shabaab also presents itself as a cool organization. So true to the theme of coolness, al-Shabaab, which is Arabic for youth, employs a rebellious and playful framing strategy designed to appeal to young males in diaspora communities. So in one of the al-Shabaab recruitment videos, an American who left Minneapolis in 2007 smiles at the camera and speaks directly to potential recruits in the diaspora, and he says, if you guys only knew how much fun we have over here, this is the real Disneyland. You need to come here and join us. So al-Shabaab styles itself in a way that may very well appeal to second generation Somalis who perhaps feel that they are languishing in the lower strata of the societies that they inhabit. It is as if recruiters acting as the cool older brother or the cool older kid are extending a privileged invitation, and those who accept can expect religious commendation and glory and adventure, and an aura of coolness will be given to them after linking up with al-Shabaab.
In the case of Bosnia and the Balkans in general, religious and national identities have long been all but fused in this space that is essentially multi-faith and multinational. So in the case of Bosnia, it was a common practice in villages in particular to refer to one's neighbors by their religious persuasion, Catholic, Muslim, Orthodox, rather than their ethnic or their national designation as Bosniak Serbs or Croats. And that was, pardon me, that was reinforced after the war. It's also important to realize and remember that there was a significant difference between urban and rural areas in Bosnia in terms of these designations before the war and after the war. In large urban centers, Sarajevo being one of those, religious designations were less common, and people cared less about it. But nowadays, it's becoming dominant even there. On the other side of this Bosnian coin, we have both Catholic Croats and Orthodox Serbs insisting on their own religious and cultural identities being one as well. So church attendance is on the rise, number of baptisms are on the rise. In the Republic of Srpska, which is a para-state that came up as a result of the American broker Dayton Peace Agreement in '95, its government institutions and some of its offices, such as various ministries and even police departments, have their own Orthodox patron saint, and every single one is celebrated with passion. Before the war, fully covered women and men with long beards in Bosnia were almost unheard of. Today, they are common. And many people welcome the Islamic revival in this multi-ethnic country. A number of scholars in Bosnia actually, as well as political scientists, politicians and religious leaders, argue that this religious awakening is partly a response, an outgrowth of the war, and that the country was divided into Muslim Croat Federation and the Republic of Bosnia, or Serbian part of Bosnia, the Serb Republic. So they saw and they see the religious revival as a positive. Others, liberal-leaning intellectuals, warn of growing culture clash between conservative Islam and Bosnia's cherished secularism in an already fragile state, which many, including yours truly, refer to as the failed state. And they particularly fear the growth of Wahhabism that aims to strip away, as they say, foreign and corrupting influences in Bosnia and Herzegovina. One that was a prominent debater and defender of the Islamic revival was the former Grand Mufti in Bosnia, Mustafa Ceric, who continues to this day to argue that Wahhabism has no future in Bosnia, even if more people were embracing religion. And he goes on to explain this growing number of believers by blaming the previous socialist system for stifling religious freedoms. And he claims, for example, that after 40 years of, as he calls it, de-Islamization, it is natural that people are now embracing the freedom to express their religion. So he links the criticism of both the Islamic revival and criticism of the presence of Wahhabi influences in Bosnia with the crimes committed against the Muslims in the Yugoslav war. He suggests that those who are criticizing and complaining about Islams and these, as he called them, new Muslims, are actually joining the chorus of Islamophobes, and they complain solely because these new Muslims, as he put it, and I quote, had survived genocide and are fighting against the current regime of apartheid. And this is the point where I would like to link with Professor McCoy's reference to the fear of delegitimization. This seems to me as an effort by a prominent religious leader, Islamic religious leader in Bosnia, to somehow safeguard the inevitable delegitimization of the Muslim struggle in the war because of the negative impacts of Wahhabi Islam in Bosnia.
the young Muslims have some idealism, resistance to Western capitalism, boredom, unemployment, emptiness, fear, hatred, humiliations, alienations, frustrations, marginalization, and hopelessness. So as a result, they are coming to fight and taking revenge. So those guys performing jihad, there was impulsive marriage happened in Iraq. What is that? Salafi group married with a secular Ba'ath party, former Saddam Hussein's militants and intelligence. It was impossible before the Iraq war. As a result, this catastrophe, as a child of war, started with Iraq. So I'm not going to go details. Those are the groups involved in ISIS from different countries, most international Salafi network. John already talked about the foreign fighters as ISIS ranks. So the Twitter or social media I studied, I'm not going to talk about it. Those are the ISIS strategy and propaganda and recruitment tools. They are using online Skype, Twitter accounts, and radicalize youth to online propaganda. What strategies and tools, motivations they are used? So jargons, Islamic theology, they are using 4 different categories. I categorize in 4 different levels. Avoid to benefit, they are seeking a free sex, polygamy, free land, easy money, monthly salary. Taliban pays $100, ISIS pays $400 in a month. Power and status, other worldly benefits is a guaranteed eternal life in heaven. What is that? If they are going to die in battle, they think they are going to heaven. How those criminals going to heaven? 10 jails broke, and most of the ISIS members come from the jails, from Iraq and Syria. Those are the criminals. To helping brothers and sisters, very common issue. The Iraqizations, I already talk about it. Those are the imaginary mythology, jargon they use. Romantic marriage, I want to talk about it. Romantic marriage, very common. A French lady, Nadia, got influence, crush on some jihadi fighters on Skype and went to Syria, and she became sex slave. So she returned in jail right now. So we have some limitations to study. We have returnees, we have to study returnees, mostly in jail. My conclusion is violent extremism has no religion. There will be always people who manipulate faith texts. Sexual holy war puts all women and children at risk. Root causes continue in Iraq and Syria. Jihadi apocalyptic tactics and tools cause big catastrophe. Networking with transnational Salafi community as a carrier. Those transnational identity, they are employing people, different parts of the world. Networking those with people. Second and third generation Muslim youth in diaspora are socially and culturally isolated in the West and choose a new path, different than their parents. Constructed fear or horror, but instead of blaming the media, we should find innovative ways to ensure our voices are to be heard. A strong counter-propaganda need to be developed. So what is our solution? Those are the solutions I found. So having suffered oppressions is no excuse for causing it, for failing to condemn terrorism. It's a great sin. Muslims must publicly promote human rights, dignity, life, liberty, equality, mutual respects, freedom, and justice. So there is a problem in the Western media and government. We should, they promote a holistic understanding of Islam as flexibility to accommodate diversity as a primary goal in the Western countries. So if you want to help them, help marginalized tourists and prevent recruitments, Western government should avoid using a statement and actions that result in the alienation of Muslims. Providing religious education to Muslims is very crucial, very critical. Governments in the Muslim world must design school curricula that nurture democratic values. Civil society has a role in promoting respect and acceptance.